Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. This morning, two important and busy figures in state government with hot issues on the front burner. Later, Secretary of State Alison Lundergan will talk about the national investigation of the 2016 elections and the steps she is taking to guard against any hacking or misdeeds in Kentucky elections going forward. The Secretary of State will be here shortly. But first, State Auditor Mike Harmon is joining us. He is talking about the extensive audit that his office did of the KFC Yum Center in Louisville. Questions led to other questions as his team looked at the finances and how tax dollars are commingled with private dollars. We'll ask about that and some other audits just completed or underway. Mike Harmon is in his first term as state auditor after being a state representative from Danville for several years before that. Auditor Harmon, thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
You've provided some context to the legislature this week on this extensive audit of the KFC Yum Center.
Yes.
It was built, of course, to be a first-class venue for athletics, for music events, other acts, but lots of questions have been raised about its financing, and you've noted that 75% of the arena's operating expenses are coming from taxpayers.
Correct.
As you looked into this and you started looking into the numbers, what were the findings that caused you to pause?
Sure. Well, first of all, let's talk about the decision to do it initially. The reason we decided to do it initially, we received a request from the Capital Projects and Bond Oversight Committee, and we were trying to figure out what would be the best way to go in and do it, because there's a couple of different options. We could do a financial statement audit. We could do what we call a special exam. We decided the best course would be to go in and do their normal financial statement audit, which they have each year, but instead of the CPA doing it, just to try to save cost for the Louisville Arena Authority and the Yum Center, as it were, and then expand that a little bit to look at the contract. So that's what we did. And part of that process, we needed to make sure that we got the financial statement audit out in a timely fashion. Basically, there were some things they were doing to, try to get these bonds refinanced. So we got that done in a timely fashion. We released that about a month ago. As part of that financial statement audit, we had one finding, and that was just particularly the finding that they weren't settling up payments between the University of Louisville and the Athletic Association, the Louisville Arena Authority, in a timely fashion. It wasn't terrible, but it was something that I think it was like $1.3 million that wasn't going. Given that their budget's tight, it was important they do that in a timely fashion. But beyond that financial statement audit, myself as well as our people wanted to look a little bit more in depth and have some additional observations. So we released the report just this Tuesday to the Capital Projects and Bond Oversight Committee, and that's actually posted on our site at auditor.ky.gov. But some of the interesting things on there were, just as you said, we found out, and this one actually stood out to me in the financial statement audit, that 75%.
And let me ask you this. You
Sure.
raised questions about whether the Arena Authority, which is the management of the operation over there, is
Sure.
really public or private. You said it was hard to determine that.
Well, it's not really public or private. It's kind of an odd bird. It was originally thought to be created by a 2005 executive order. A lot of people don't understand that that particular executive order was actually rescinded in 2006 retroactively. It was set up as a nonprofit, but the way it was set up, the governor appoints the lion's share of the board members. As we said, the lion's share of its support comes from taxpayers' dollars. The TIF makes up a good portion, and then the Louisville Metro kicks in a good portion as well. So what we have recommended to the Finance Cabinet is it actually become a component unit of the state for the financial statements that we put together.
Right now they have no dedicated staff, right? Of their own.
Correct.
They contract everything that is done. So that's a lot of contracts and paperwork, isn't it?
They do, and the biggest problem that we found with that is, of course, their board members are part-time. They have no dedicated staff, so there could be a conflict of interest. I'm not saying that they're doing anything, but there's just not proper oversight.
The original analysis of the arena taxing district was that there would be a lot more money coming in than has shown up.
Correct.
Is that the reason that they find themselves in such a continuous shortfall?
That's part of it. That's a big piece of the puzzle. There's other things. The biggest problem is when they did that initially, although the University of Louisville didn't do the exact analysis that was done with the Finance Cabinet, but the Finance Cabinet and some of those based out of the budget, actually the budget office, made that determination using, to a large degree, a University of Louisville analysis of sales tax in the area. Well, that sales tax in the area was actually estimates anyway, so it wasn't even actual, but we don't actually gather sales tax data by the county. But even that was flawed, because for property tax, they used a 10-year period. For sales tax, which actually makes up the largest portion of the TIF, they use a year between 1990 and 1991 where the state actually increased the sales tax by 1%. So they kind of baked in an increase into that, which made the data flawed. Now, the initial estimates they did, they said were more conservative than what the University of Louisville recommended, but if the initial data was flawed, being conservative from that certainly wouldn't help.
Tell me if I'm wrong about this.
Sure.
The initial bonding, the borrowing, was close to $350 million.
Correct.
And still owed is about over $340 million.
Yeah,
right?
close, a little over $341 million.
After 10 years.
Now, you've got to remember, you've had about $350 million in bonding, but the state on top of that put in $75 million in the 2006-2008 budget. So it was $350 million in bonding, but the total cost was probably close to $425 million.
Do you fear the taxpayers are too exposed or too much on the hook?
I think they're certainly paying a whole lot more. The point that we made is the University of Louisville, and one of the other charts we show that the University of Louisville's Athletic Association's net position skyrocketed once the Yum Center opened. The net position of the Louisville Arena Authority basically is on a tanking process. So it's important for a couple of things. One, for the University of Louisville to step up and go ahead and honor what we believe to have been the commitment, but go ahead and make sure that they're putting more money in. The second thing they need to do is they need to refinance that debt. And that's in the process of what they're doing, because initially it was set up, they thought the TIF would grow at a much larger rate. So they kind of set it up on a rising debt payments. It's kind of like if you put your home on an arm, but you knew the arm was going to go up. So, right now their bonding payment's about $23 million a year. Well, not too many in the distant future, it's going to be $38 million. Well, if they have the revenues they have now, they're never going to hit that. So they need more of a levelized.
Well, we talked about a lot of numbers, but you also
Yes.
made another observation having to do with some seats that are near some of the suites over there.
Yeah, we kind of threw in a little bit of a humorous line, and the only reason I did that is, a lot of times I'll use humor to pull things off the page. Yeah. But it's so ridiculous because there are, of course, they sell the suites, and in front of the suites there's some additional seating. Now, as kind of a give to the Louisville Arena Authority, when there's not a University of Louisville basketball game, they can sell those seats in front of it. The problem is if they don't sell them to the suite owners, there's no way to access them. So I jokingly said, well, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. You can put a ladder up, you can use a rope and grappling hook, or of course my favorite is the jetpack, to end up getting there. And I know it sounds silly
or
and ridiculous.
have somebody crawl through somebody else's suite.
Somebody
right?
Well, one of my friends said his brother, after he saw the presentation, said, people are going to come in and say, here's your ticket to the concert, here's your rope and your Yum Center grappling hook, enjoy the concerts. So
your advice to them moving forward is?
Advice to them moving forward, obviously get the thing refinanced, obviously, and make sure the payments are level. University of Louisville needs to go ahead and kick in additional money, and they need additional review and monitoring.
You have been conducting other audits, including one that looked at the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife.
We
and
did.
You make some recommendations to them.
We do, and we do that typically on a yearly basis anyway, but we had some items that we looked at, and there was a specific contract that dealt in interaction between the Fish and Wildlife and their foundation that they had there, and there was just some concerns on how they were doing some of the contracts, so we made some recommendations, and that, like any of our audits, are on our website at auditor.ky.gov.
You are looking into the administrative office of the courts right now, which runs the court system statewide.
Correct.
I know you're just getting started with that, but
yes.
What are you anticipating doing with that?
Well, they actually asked us to come in, and someone else in the press asked me, is that because of some of the concerns that they've had that's been in the paper, and I can't really speak to that directly. I'm assuming that was probably part of their genesis for us to do it, but they did invite us in, and we're doing For lack of a better comparison, we're probably doing something not completely unlike our University of Louisville governance examination, in that we're coming in and looking at their policies and procedures. But in doing that, we also told them, if we see some red flags or something we need to explore further, we reserve the right, to expand that. Beyond that, there's really not a whole lot to say until we get in there and look at the data.
Do you follow up on audits that you do, like the examination of the Kentucky Horse Park, which earlier this year you labeled poorly run after an 8-month investigation?
Well, and that was another situation where the taxpayers were basically picking up the, a large share. I think if I remember correctly, over a 10-year period, the state had to kick in an additional $24 million, if I remember correctly. But so, yeah, I mean, whenever we do an audit, not always, but typically what will happen is they will submit basically a corrective action type document back to us. For instance, I know the University of Louisville just did a more expansive forensic audit. Well, a lot of the things they're wanting, the University of Louisville and the foundation to correct, they're already in the process of correcting, because they took our governance audit and they took it seriously, and they've been working to correct a lot of those items.
Do you encourage Kentuckians to report suspected waste, fraud, and abuse in
definitely,
their governments?
Definitely. We have, as I said, we have a safe house at auditor.ky.gov, where if they want us to follow up with them, we can, or if they just want to do it anonymously, they can. They can also call 1-800-KY-ALERT.
There is a proposal to move Kentucky's statewide elections to even-numbered years, probably beginning in 2024. That's the proposed amendment now, which would have to pass the legislature with supermajorities and then be ratified by the voters. That could mean an extra year on the terms of those elected in 2019. Do you support that?
I'm fairly neutral on that. As we talked before we came on the air, I had some concerns about some earlier versions of that would basically give us an additional year now and then start the elections, I guess, in 2020. I wasn't in favor of that, because when people elected me, they elected me for a 4-year term. But if the people vote for the constitutional amendment and we run in 2019 and the people know that they're electing you to a 5-year term, I'm okay with that.
Do you plan to run for re-election in 2019?
It is my intention. We've been doing a lot of praying about it. It is my intention to run again, and we'll probably have a more formal announcement here fairly soon.
Auditor, thank you for coming by. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it very much.
I really appreciate you. Thank you, Bill.
Keep it here now on WKYT Kentucky Newsmakers. Secretary of State Alison Lundergan Grimes on fallout from last year's elections and the plan going forward to make sure voting is not hacked in some way. Secretary Grimes coming next. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT. The months since the November election in this country have been filled with accusations that Russians interfered with the process. What were Kentucky officials aware of before, and what have we learned since some revelations have been made? Secretary of State Alison Lundergan Grimes is here to give us some insight on that. Secretary also recently returned from a trip to Taiwan. She says she came back with the belief that the economic relationship between Kentucky and Taiwan can be strengthened. A proposed constitutional amendment would change Kentucky's elections for constitutional office holders to even-numbered years starting in 2024. To accomplish that, those elected in 19 would get a 5-year term in office. How does the Secretary of State feel about that in the coming elections? Happy to have the Secretary of State of the Commonwealth, Alison Lundergan Grimes, back. Good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Good to see you, Bill. Happy summer.
Thank you. Right, and there we are. Madam Secretary, what did you know about any attempts to hack Kentucky's elections last fall, or did you have concerns going toward that vote?
Well, obviously what we know today is a lot different than the knowledge that was publicly shared prior to the November 2016 general election. My office has been working diligently in conjunction with our Election Integrity Task Force for many years now. Members of that task force include the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security. Other states around the nation aren't similar to Kentucky. People have to remember elections are left to the states to run. And here in Kentucky, I've taken a proactive approach to make sure that we have all the necessary parties to protect the integrity of our election at the table. So last year, obviously, it was a heated discussion and battle, especially for presidency of the United States. But there were claims and accusations of attempts to interfere with registration systems, meaning the systems that people register to actually then show up on Election Day and vote. Here in Kentucky, we were very guarded and careful with our systems, monitoring any attempts by folks to either come into or try to receive information out of our systems. We had no such indication either from our own review and work that we were doing with our partners or information from any other intelligence agency that Kentucky was a target then or is a target now. Obviously, the information that is now public from intelligence agency officials is a little bit different for states other than Kentucky.
The federal government says it got pushback from some states when it attempted to classify the voting equipment as critical assets and basically put it under U.S. government control. You have already made the point here that you say it is up to the states to run the elections. Where did you stand on that?
Well, the Department of Homeland Security made, prior to the election, a designation without providing a lot of information to the chief election officials, secretaries of state like myself, around the country. In fact, it was pointedly asked to the Department of Homeland Security, are there any attempts that you're aware of that would necessitate a critical infrastructure designation? And keep in mind, for the public, what's a critical infrastructure designation? It's given to places that, for instance, have control over water, electricity grids, things that could really imperil our nation, our country, if they were severely attacked. And obviously, elections are infrastructure that is important, just like our roads and waterways. But we wanted to try to understand why the Department of Homeland Security was so insistent on that designation. We know now, thanks to disclosures from Reality Winter, why that's the case. We know now that the Department of Homeland Security had information about 21 states, Kentucky not being one of them, that was at issue. And we want to give the voters of the Commonwealth reassurance. I do, especially as the chief election official, that we had no information from the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, our election integrity task force members prior to or after the election to date that indicates Kentucky was a target, is a target for election cyber attacks.
So to this day, you do not believe that during that election cycle, Kentucky was hacked?
I do not believe so. And we continue to be vigilant and monitor. Obviously, cybersecurity is something that changes moment to moment, minute to minute, day by day. And it's something that we have to continually be guarded against, making sure that we're auditing our systems daily, hourly, and importantly, working closely. Unlike other states, I think what's differently situated about Kentucky that the electorate here in the Commonwealth should know and be reassured about is we have been working prior to the election with the Department of Homeland Security, unlike many other states, and especially with the FBI.
But you do acknowledge that you are concerned about election hacking becoming more sophisticated going forward, right? And that this will require continued diligence.
Well, I think we have to be, we can't bury our heads in the sand. We have to be aware in this day and age, the way to have influence and to have an impact, and especially something that is as large as a presidential election. We have 16 intelligence agencies that all confirmed last year Russia engaged in an interference, a persuasion campaign. But when it comes to the vote tallying, the ultimate votes, people should have assurance that here in Kentucky and across the nation, our voting systems themselves, what you actually cast your vote on, those aren't connected to the internet. And importantly, they have an audible trail after the fact, a paper trail after the fact. So that should give voters reassurance. But I do think that in this day and age, when we are so dependent on technology, that we need to make sure that we are realizing others want to do us harm here in the United States. Our democracy is something that they would like very much to infringe upon, and we have to be guarded.
I know it's very difficult to staff all of those election precincts on Election Day. At the same time, has the time come to more diligently screen screen those who run elections?
We have over 15,000 precinct election officers, many, Bill, as you know, who have decades of experience in this area. They have been precinct election officers since many before I was born. We are taking great care to make sure that they're up to date on the technology that we are using, that they are prepared, and most importantly, that voters have a positive experience when they go to the polls. I can't thank the 15,000 folks here in Kentucky enough that help us run our 3,500 precincts. And I think it's important when we talk about elections and election security, that's just Kentucky. Multiply that by 50 states, multiply that by multiple jurisdictions in terms of their precincts, and what you have is a very decentralized system left to the states to run, which makes any attempted overall hacking just very hard to do, and something that I think why we saw Russia wasn't successful at doing that in this election. That doesn't mean that there aren't going to be future attempts. They did engage in a persuasion attempt to interfere with our election by trying to persuade the public over social media interference. So it's something that we have to be guarded against. It's something that my administration is very vigilant and working in conjunction with the State Board of Elections to oversee, to audit our systems. And ultimately, we want to give reassurance to the voters that they can have confidence in the election results at the end of the day.
Given that there are no elections this year and that it will be next year before there are elections, does that give this state and maybe others some time to really have a look at things before the next time people enter those polls? Well,
I wish I could tell you, even though this is an off-election year, that it's been quiet on the election front. You yourself, WKYT has reported, as we've put forth, there have been numerous wet-dry elections,
special elections
throughout the state. So while I wish I could tell you that our county clerks had all of this time to simply prepare for the next election, which is 300 days away, 332 days away to be exact, if you're looking at the primary election in May of 2018. But who's counting? They've had a lot on their plates, but they're very good. Our county clerks are very good at helping to multitask. That's what they are doing, as well as the Secretary of State and State Board of Elections.
Business filings have hit a record in Kentucky. The people who record their business information with your office. How much of that is being done online now? Well,
we'd like to see the majority of it pushed to online, but obviously we still want to be cognizant there's businesses out there that like to walk into Frankfort. They also like to send by mail their annual report. Over 200,000 plus businesses are responsible for filing an annual report. Last year, I was so excited. In the 6 years I've been Secretary of State, we have pushed for the online filing process. It's more efficient, it's effective, it takes folks less time than actually trying to fill out paper, and less resources on the state end and trying to process it, actually more accurate. As with voter registration, you're entering the information as opposed to a second-hand entry. And what we've seen this year is the records, we're on par to surpass where we were in 2016 with 2017 filings. But the deadline coming up on June 30th. People need to be aware.
Secretary of State Alison Lundergan Grimes is with us on Kentucky Newsmakers. Our remaining moments with her when we come right back. Welcome back. Great to have you here on WKYT for Kentucky Newsmakers, and Secretary of State Alison Lundergan Grimes is our guest today. You made a recent trip to Taiwan. You called it a trade mission. What did you do and learn on that trip?
Well, it was an honor to be one of 4 secretaries to be hosted by the Taiwanese government. It was a trade mission, an economic development mission, the second of its kind that I have undertaken as Secretary of State for Kentucky. And people don't realize I'm the chief business official for this state, and I take very seriously the role to help encourage economic development. This was a trip that continued to reassure the strong bonds we have with Taiwan and to explore the opportunities that are still available to make sure that we grow the economy of Kentucky abroad, and especially the investments that we want to come back to this state.
Do you support moving Kentucky's statewide elections to even-numbered years? There is a current proposal to move the one to the presidential year after 2019. The next one would be 2024. Therefore, there would be a 5-year term for those elected in 2019. Do you support that?
Well, you know, the focus of moving our elections, it's one that I understand. It's saving dollars. It's trying to be efficient and effective, and a fiscal responsibility with state taxpayer dollars. But I think folks have to recall, most recently, a Georgia special election. What were the headlines? $50 million were spent in a very short span of time in that federal election. My concern when we move state elections to be in conjunction with federal elections is that the issues get drowned out. Would there be any airwaves left for a statewide candidate to actually get a message out if you put it in conjunction with federal elections? I'd argue rightly not. I think you also inject more money into our elections, which is not something we need to do. But I think having the discussion, which is one that I've had with Chairman Imes, Representative Kenny Imes, who heads the Elections and Constitutions Committee for the House of Representatives, I think it's a discussion worth having. But if the goal is not only to save money, but to make sure we increase participation, it's not presidential election years where we see participation actually increasing for both the primary and the general. It's our county election years. So if their argument is one that they want to stand by, we should be looking at a county election year, for instance, what we're getting ready to have coming up in 2018. And that would actually coincide. You'd be talking about state issues that affect our counties, and you wouldn't be interfering the federal election dollars in that race.
Your term limited as Secretary of State. What does the future hold for you as you head toward the end of your time in that office? Do you have plans for 2019?
I haven't looked at that crystal ball. Everybody that I've talked to, I've really said that 18 comes before 19. I think these elections that are going to be held in 2018 are critical. They're critical to see the state and the future for the Commonwealth. Our county officials, they deal with so much, and that's where my focus has been. We have a lot of great folks, especially on my side of the aisle, that I hope to see get re-elected as county elected officials. And by that point, I hope there'll be a decision that'll be ahead. But my time as Secretary of State, we have 2 years left, and we're making the most of each and every day, whether it's traveling to Taiwan or making sure that we're preparing both our businesses for growth and our elections. That's where we're headed.
You'd like to continue in public service?
I hope whatever I do, Bill, that I continue to use the skills that I've been given by God to make a difference for others in the state.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Secretary of State Alison Lundergan Grimes. Thank you for joining us for Kentucky Newsmakers. We hope you make it a good week ahead.